That's great. Do others have anything they want to add?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, I think this point about having much more rigorous research in the work that we do is something that seems to me to be coming out of the resilience process. And a bit of humility on this, as John said. This is a new construct. We're thinking about how this works and how we can redesign things. And so the ability to work with learning organizations, I think, is really important to this process at the moment. And just to give you an example of the sort of things that we're sort of tackling. When we traditionally work in emergency situations, we have a whole team of people that work on really fast burn, immediate saving lives approaches. And they have a very different approach to how to work with communities compared to our development teams, who tend to work on much longer term approaches, trying to reduce costs and much more of a slow burn approach. So how do we find ways of making that transition process work well is something that we're really spending time with lots of people thinking about how to do that kind of thing better. There's lots of new things coming out of that processes. When we talk to the emergency teams, rather than them going in and spending quickly, our money with our things, what they're tending to do now is look at reinvesting up through local supply chains so that they can, for example, open new lines of credit to the local suppliers so that you're building in from the very beginning of that process a much longer term link between manufacturers or of whatever products that we're working with, plus the local trade organizations and that community. And I think we didn't do that before. And that's just an example of how we're seeing the changes taking place. But also that means if we're working in that way with emergency, we can much more easily dovetail with that, with the development work. And there are many examples of how this is working, but the emergency team was saying to me the other day that, whereas in the past they used to do short-term shelter, and then they would have to come back 2 years later and do different types of shelter, and then come back, years later and do more permanent shelter constructs. What they're starting to do is build in from the very beginning the idea of a product that can be upgraded as they go by the local community through their local supply chains. So it's just that kind of thinking, which is making us rethink the way that we're doing the work as usual kind of thing. And I think that just highlights a couple of gaps, and there are many gaps, I'm sure, but just these things that we're trying to address things in quite different ways. But obviously we need a lot of help in doing that, and I think again working with the research agencies and the learning agencies is a really important part of that process, so that we learn more quickly. We fail more quickly, but we learn and we adapt more effectively.
Terrific. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Go ahead, Christel.
Yeah, because I realize we didn't really talk a lot about humanitarian response, actually. And it is critical to resilience thinking, and it is so critical to almost fully integrate humanitarian and development thinking around this concept of resilience, which is so hard to do. I think every organization, I don't know, well, maybe I should speak for myself. I see many organizations, including CARE, struggling with that, because we have institutional divides between humanitarian work and development work. But I really want to encourage everyone to really keep thinking about this, because it is so important. And I think the institutional divide, it makes that you have, you talk to different people, you make different plans, so we have to somehow overcome that. And it's only then that we can really do thoughtful and really strategic resilience programming.
Great. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that question? Sure, of course.
It's a strange analogy, and excuse me, but we passed 9. Yes, I think I can say this. Every time I see an innovation in the field, this analogy often comes to mind, is that a field is opened, or a space is opened in a field, and I think about this. If resilience were a sport, how would we be doing? And it's as though a space in the field's opened up, and a number of teams arrive on the field, and some have decided to play football, some baseball, some golf, and they're all occupying the same field. And you can imagine, if you get a visual, what this is like. And one of the benefits, and I think an important piece of work needs to be done, and this group helps facilitate that, bringing it back to measurement, is the notion of having a common core data set. And this group works together and occupies a significant amount of space on that field, and I think that's really worthwhile to note. in thinking about how they can measure resilience in a common way, a much more attractive sight than teams playing rugby, golf, all in the same field. So that's something I wanted to highlight. So, thanks.
Great.
Yes, I'm probably just, in this discourse, I would like to know how much of it happens at a community level. Are we discussing at our level and sharing information at our level? Or are we sharing the information also at a community level? Are we allowing the communities, the people in the communities, to actually lead the discussion somehow? Or we are leading the discussion? Because when we lead the discussion, then we are building resilience for ourselves. So my question here is that who is leading the discussion and how much of it are the communities participating in this discussion? That's a question I would like to ask to everybody who is in here.
Great. So we have some time. There are many people in the room. So we've added in a little bit of extra time to enable everybody to shift into smaller groups. I'd originally said 4. Let's increase that number. Let's try to go with 8 groups. We're going to see how this works. We have some time. It is 9:20. We've started to dig into some of the challenges that resilience presents, just along the entire time frame of how we're implementing humanitarian as well as development work. So the question for your breakout groups is, what do you need to be able to address resilience better? If you were to make recommendations to decision makers, what would those recommendations be? And when I say decision makers, I mean policymakers, donors, practitioners, other NGOs, the research community, anyone that's really engaged in the resilience debate or needs to be engaged. What would you recommend that they do? And as you break out, if one of you can just jot down a few notes, we'd like to make sure we collect those because, as I said at the beginning, we are a learning consortium, so we want to inform our own work. I'm going to do a little crowdsourcing while we're here. But when you report out, because we're now going to have 8 groups, if you can each just report out one recommendation. I realize that might be tough, but if you can report out one recommendation that you would make to decision makers. We can move the chairs around a little bit. There's a little time between the side events to put them back together. So if I can have a group in kind of this general area, and then a few back as you're moving back, say 3, and then again 4 on this side. We're going to see how this works. We appreciate your flexibility and adventurousness this early in the morning.